Hebrews chapter number 2. Continuing our time in this glorious book, revealing to us the greatness of the Son of God, the greatness, the superiority of our Savior, Jesus. We'll be in verses 5 through 18 of chapter 2. It is not to angels that he has subjected the world to come, about which we are speaking. But there is a place where someone has testified, "What is mankind that you are mindful of them? A son of man that you care for him. You made them a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor and put everything under their feet. And putting everything under them, God left nothing that is not subject to them. Yet at present we do not see everything subject to them. But we do see Jesus, who is made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. And bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. He says, "I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly I will sing your praises. And again, I will put my trust in him." And again he says, "Here am I and the children God has given me." Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. We have looked and established the greatness of Jesus in the past couple sections of Hebrews. The first chapter and the first few verses of the second chapter have exalted and highlighted the superiority of Jesus. He is greater than the Old Testament prophets. Now, the author of Hebrews is not trying to denigrate or tear down those Old Testament prophets. He actually has a very high view of the Old Testament prophets because half his book is quoting them. He thinks very highly of them, but Jesus is greater than them. And then he talks about the angels. He does not diminish the angels. He does not say the angels are insignificant. He doesn't say the angels are lowly. He doesn't say that the angels aren't exalted. But Jesus is greater than the angels. He is the superior Son. He is greater than everything. And it is good that Jesus is greater than everything. It is something that is worthy of worship. To have a God greater than everything ought call the whole world to bow down in worship to him. And the author of Hebrews presents him in such a way that we cannot help but respond in worship when we understand who he is and what he is like. But in this passage today, our author takes a turn. In this passage, instead of simply establishing that Jesus is great, that Jesus is superior, he brings it down to us. Jesus is not only great, he is great for us. There's two concepts that we see in the story of Jesus in the Bible, and they're both essential to his nature. One is the idea of transcendence. He is above, he is greater than, he is outside of. We sang holy, holy, holy this morning, echoing the words of the seraphim in Isaiah 6, crying out about the holiness of God, reflecting on some of the beautiful passages in the throne room of God in the book of Revelation, where he is exalted and lifted high. He is a transcendent God. He's not like us. But that's only part of the story, because he is also an immanent God. He is a God who is with us. The angels cry out, "Holy, holy, holy." The psalmist writes that there is none like him. But then Jesus comes, and his name is Emmanuel, God with us. Yes, Jesus is a great God. Yes, the Son is great, of surpassing glory, of surpassing value, of surpassing beauty. But he came to be with us and like us. He is a great God for us. His greatness is demonstrated through his humility. That's not what we're used to thinking of for greatness. But Jesus' greatness is most clearly demonstrated when he is humble, in spite of being the only man who did not need to be humble. The only man who could truly say that his greatness was because of himself. The only one who is not dependent on anyone else. The one who, if anyone has a right to be proud, to be jealous of honor, and the Bible declares that for him. But Jesus, in his incarnation, is humble. In this text, we see expounded a doctrine of anthropology, the study of man, but also a doctrine of Christology, the study of Christ. But they're united together because Christ is a man. Verses 5 through 8 quote from the Psalms in a passage that emphasizes the surprising value of mankind. We are a little lower than the angels. And so the psalmist asks, and the author of Hebrews quotes him, "What is mankind that you are mindful of them, a son of man that you care for them?" Why, God, would you care about mankind? Think of all the flaws. Think of all the warts, all of the problems that mankind has. Yet, they have this unique role in God's economy, this unique place in how God deals with the world. Man is surprisingly special. When we were in the first chapters of Genesis, we talked about the doctrine of man, and we saw that man is glorious dirt. We're made from the dust of the earth. The stuff that we are composed of is not special. From ashes to ashes and dust to dust, we come from the dirt. God forms us out of the dirt. There is nothing special with dirt. When you see dirt, you try to get rid of dirt. Yet God glorifies the dirt by breathing life into it, by placing his image in it. Mankind is surprisingly special. It's not what you expected. A few years ago, my wife and I were on a little getaway just north of San Diego in this nice little beach town. And there are lots of great things about California. One of the worst things about California is it's an utter pizza wasteland. As a Midwesterner raised a little bit outside of Chicago, with Milwaukee having really good pizza, married to a New Yorker, pizza plays an important role in our family. And California is a pizza desert. But this one time on this one trip, there happened to be a pizza place across from our hotel, and we tried it, and it was amazing. The pizza that we tried there was called, I think it was called the Honey Bee Pizza. And it had chili-infused honey on top of the pizza. And when I saw that, I thought, that is so weird. Who puts honey on top of a pizza? But the way I eat, I see that as weird, and I think, well, someone smart decided to do that, so I should try it. And it changed my life. We now have 2 bottles of honey on our table for Friday pizza night. 1 chili infused for Dad, 1 not chili infused for the rest of the family. Because honey on pizza is delicious. Surprisingly so. You don't look at a pizza and think, I should put bee juice on that. Yet, it surprises us. It is delicious. Similarly, mankind, you don't look at mankind and think, wow, how great are they? Made from dirt, rebelling against their Creator from the very beginning, what good are we? Yet we are valuable in God's eyes, so valuable in fact that God Himself becomes one of us. But our value is not in what we're made of. Our value is not in what we do. Our value is in the God who has fixed Himself upon us, who has placed His image within us. Our specialness is grounded not in us, but in God Himself. So in this book that exalts the Christ, that exalts the Son of God, why would our author pause to talk about anthropology, to talk about man? Because God becomes man. So what does the humanity of Christ accomplish for us? 4 things. First of all, the Son is our King. The Son is our King. We see here in Hebrews, it says, in putting everything under them, God left nothing that is not subject to them. Yet at present, we do not see everything subject to them. But we do see Jesus, who is made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor because He suffered death, so that by the grace of God, He might taste death for everyone. Jesus is King. Now, that doesn't mean a lot to us because we live in kind of a post-monarchy world. We live in a world where monarchies aren't generally viewed as good. If anything, they're vestigial organs of old societies. What in the world does the King of England do? Not much. Right? You can't live as long as the Queen of England lived and do much. There's got too much stress and you can't live that long. So she must not be too stressed in her job. What does a king do? Is a king good? There's 2 flaws with kings, really. The first flaw with a king is that power wielded by a human is corrupting. They're sinners, they're sinful, and so oftentimes with too much power, they become dictators. They become domineering of their nation. And so, as a modern society, we've kind of thrown off the monarchy. There's another problem, because sometimes you get a good king. There are lots of good kings in history, but good kings die. And then their sons become king. And they're not picked because they have demonstrated such good character. They're picked because who their daddy is. And so they end up being a failure, yet in their highest, it's actually a very good system of government. There's a reason we don't do it because of its weaknesses, but a good king is a great blessing for his nation. And God created mankind to have kings ruling over it. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, we find out that the first king was supposed to be Adam. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Mankind is supposed to rule over creation. However, we failed to rule over creation. 2 chapters later, in chapter 3, the serpent, an animal, a created thing that man is supposed to be ruling over, comes on the scene. "You will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman, "for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be open. You will be like God, knowing good and evil." Rather than subduing the serpent in rebellion to the Creator, mankind submits to the serpent instead of the Creator, failing in his role as king. And then from the garden onward, that story of kingship is carried throughout all of the Old Testament. In Genesis 49:10, a king is promised when it says, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nation shall be his." Judah, a descendant of Judah, will hold the kingly scepter and will rule over the nations. Yet shortly after Judah dies, God's people are oppressed by the wicked king Pharaoh. So we see this conflict where God has established a kingly line within his people, but they are ruled by King Pharaoh. They are eventually delivered from King Pharaoh, delivered into the land of Israel, conquering the nations around them. But then in Judges, as they are getting established in the nation, you get to the darkest portion of the Bible, the end of Judges, with horrible stories, a story that echoes the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, but this time it's not the outsiders, it's God's people who are perpetrating the evil. And that story starts in Judges chapter 19. In those days, Israel had no king. You fast forward a few years, and you get to Samuel ruling over Israel. He's getting older, and Israel wants a king to rule over them, but it's described in 1 Samuel 8 as a king like the other nations. Verse number 6 of 1 Samuel 8, but when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel, so he prayed to the Lord. The Lord told him, "Listen to all the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. They want a king other than God." And that king fails. Chapter 8 is when they inaugurate him. Chapter 15 is when he loses the kingdom. Doesn't take very long. But then God does give his people a human king. He gives them David. In 1 Samuel 16, so he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." God gives Israel a good King David. And David conquers his enemies. David brings unity to the kingdom, but David has the same two fatal flaws that human kings all tend to have. The first flaw, David sins. He falls short. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 7. Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you, your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes?" The good King David has a flaw. He's not always good. But he has another flaw. We see this in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 10. Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. David's first flaw, he's not always good. His second flaw, he dies too. Even good King David passes from the scene. I'm not going to list all the kings that follow because I can't. They have weird names and there's lots of them. But many kings follow after this, and the vast majority of them are wicked kings. Wicked king after wicked kings. He did not do what was right in God's eyes. He followed the ways of his father, and then they name one of the bad fathers. He did not follow the ways of his father David. Wicked king after wicked king. Eventually Israel is sent into exile because another king, Nebuchadnezzar, comes and conquers God's people. Man does not rule as he should. And this is why the author of Hebrews in verse 8 says, "Yet at present we do not see everything subject to them." Mankind is not ruling as he ought. But while we do not see mankind ruling as he ought, we do see something. Verse number 9 of Hebrews 2. But we do see Jesus, who is made lower than the angels for a little while. He was a man, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. The kings have fatal flaws. They're not good all the time, and even the good ones die. Jesus reverses both of those because Jesus is good all the time. And Jesus' death is not taken as the end of his reign. Jesus' death is the inauguration. Jesus conquers death. And here in Hebrews, where it talks about him becoming God's son, it talks about him, that point in time where he becomes king, where he sits at the right hand of the throne, where he takes on that crown. That happens in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. We have a king who is good, and we have a king who will not die because he already has, and death lost. And so Jesus is our King. And that provides us great hope. In a world where we do not see mankind ruling as it ought, in a world where we see the failures of human government on display, in a world where we see wicked empires prospering, where we see evil done in the name of governments around the world, in a world where we oftentimes look at our government and think it is doing wrong, we rejoice that there is a king, and we do not see his rule now, but we do see him, and he is seated at the right hand of God, and we have nothing to fear on this earth because of it. He is a great God, but he is a great God for us. Death has died. He is the fulfillment of human kingship. He faces temptation like the earthly kings do, but they sin and he doesn't. He dies like the earthly kings do, but they stay dead and he does not. He reigns through experiencing our weaknesses and conquering them. In the cross of Christ, death died, and the king was inaugurated. It would not be enough for him to just experience what we have experienced. He must triumph over it, and he has. He has walked this sorrowful, suffering life. He has entered the grave, and he has risen again, the conquering king, inaugurated through death, rather than having his reign end through death. The second characteristic of Jesus we see here is that the Son is our pioneer. Verse number 10, in bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. Jesus is our pioneer. He is our leader. He is one who goes before as an example and a pathfinder. He's not just an example, he actually makes the way. When I was 14, I spent the summer on my aunt and uncle's ranch out in Wyoming. They own smallish, that's big for here, but small for ranch levels, small ranch in California or in Wyoming. Their ranch is operated just like old-fashioned cowboy style stuff. Like my uncle would feel more comfortable getting in a time machine and going back to 1860 than getting in a car and driving to New York City. They still drive their cattle to the mountains on horseback. One of my favorite jobs, or one of my daily jobs that I had to do, was going to get the cows from down the road. They live in the middle of nowhere, so they're milk cows. They just let them graze in the ditch. And as the summer advances, they go farther up the road as they eat all the grass, and I would have to ride my bike and go and get them. But as I rode my bike, I was riding alongside a path through their pasture that you could still see, this kind of dirt path that winds its way through their pasture over some of the hills. That dirt path is the Oregon Trail, and it actually runs right across their property. You can find old discarded stuff from the trail on their property. They found rifles and pistols and ox shoes. It's a really cool thing to see, and you can still see it. Now, in 2 weeks, I'm going to be driving out that direction. I'm going to be driving out to Utah to meet some friends, go camping with my family. You know who's going to have an easier time making that trip? The guy who's not in a wagon going across the dirt, but in a car down the highway. It will take me about 2 days to do what would take them about 2 months, because the pioneers made the way. They kind of established a presence out there, and now our travel to the west looks very different than their travel to the west 150 years ago. They are pioneers. They're establishing a path. So when it talks about Jesus being the pioneer of their salvation, not only is Jesus showing the way, but he is actually making the way for us. Life in this world is filled with suffering. The very first sound a baby makes is complaining about its suffering. It's suffering because it entered this suffering world. And then when we die, most of us will die with some element of suffering and sorrow involved. Life in this world is filled with suffering, and so Jesus, as the pioneer of our suffering, of our salvation, must deal with suffering. His suffering is not wasted, though. He does not suffer for no reason. He suffers and is perfected through suffering. When we say perfected, think of the idea of like a doctor going through medical school. There's this process they have to go through to get to the end. Jesus' process to get to the end, Jesus' process to ultimately secure our salvation required him going through suffering on this earth. And he did. And he suffered without complaint. He suffered without sin. And he triumphed over suffering and death and the grave. The Son is a pioneer in dealing with suffering. He is an example to us, but he also gives us hope in suffering, that Jesus will one day end suffering, that he will wipe the tears from our eyes, that he will restore this world to what it should have been without our rebellion. Because Jesus, the Son, is great, but not only is he great, he is great for us. The next thing we see about the Son is that the Son is our brother. Verse number 11. Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. He says, I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly I will sing your praises, and again I will put my trust in him. And again he says, here am I and the children God has given me. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. Jesus is not ashamed to call us brother. He's not ashamed to call us sister. He is one of us. He became a man. The author uses quotations from two Old Testament passages, both Psalm 22 and Isaiah 8, where it references, there's these messianic passages that reference the sibling nature of humanity with their rescuer. Jesus experiences humanity in all its weakness and all its shame. Understand this idea of shame, not wanting to be associated with certain things, certain groups of people. And years ago, I went to a public orchestra concert in Central Park. There were something like 100,000 people there for this concert. And we overheard someone in the kind of roped-off rich person seating area referring to the non-roped-off, not rich person seating area, which, by the way, was where we were seated, obviously, as the unwashed. Don't want to be associated with the unwashed. On Thursday, I picked up a canoe for our family. Bill Rosga helped me load it onto my car. And I had these nylon tie-down straps, you know, those ratchet straps that you use just enough to forget how to use them every time you have to use them. I had this canoe mounted, and I learned a new scientific term, vortex-induced vibration. And I learned this because when you have a long stretch of one of those straps, if it is straight and you drive down the road, there is something about the resonation and the wind that strap starts vibrating really, 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 really fast. So you're supposed to put a twist in the strap so that it doesn't do that. Well, I didn't realize that because I'm not very smart about things like that. Most things I try and fix end up worse after I'm done fixing them than before. And so I had this on, and not only did I have the strap making the vibration, a metal canoe is basically a giant speaker attached to the top of your car. And so I pulled away from Bill's house, and I got on 76th Street, and as soon as I hit 35 miles per hour, I hear... I don't know how loud it was outside the car, but I know how loud it was inside the car. And everyone in the general Milwaukee County area could see this hick redneck driving the car down the road with his musical canoe. And I just sat there thinking, I don't know, who's that noise? Where's that coming from? I don't want to be thought of as the person with the musical canoe on his car. We understand that idea of shame, not wanting to be blended in with the worst people. Jesus wasn't like that. Jesus became exactly like us. in all of our weakness and all our frailty. The transcendent King of the universe who did not suffer, did not need anything, was not dependent on anyone, became an infant baby. I hate the song Away in a Manger. No crying he made. Thank God Jesus cried. Thank God he suffered with us, like us, became a baby, the King of all creation, by whom all things consist, drank milk and needed his mom to pat him on his back so he would burp to deal with the gas that it caused. That's the King of creation, and he was not ashamed to be like us. He is our brother. Rather than avoiding the shame, he embraces the shame. He is like us. And so when I look in the mirror and I don't like what I see, I can be confident because Jesus was human. He is my brother. He has experienced the weaknesses that I experienced. Jesus is like us, embracing our shame. And then he transitions this into a massive application with the final point: the Son is our priest. For this reason, he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. He shares our humanity fully in every way, so that he can be our Redeemer. The 4th century pastor Gregory Nazianzus wrote this about the Son of God: "For that which he has not assumed, he has not healed. But that which is united to his Godhead is also saved. If only half Adam fell, then that which Christ assumes and saves may be half also. But if the whole of Adam's nature fell, it must be united to the whole nature of him that was begotten, and so be saved as a whole." Jesus needed to become wholly, fully, truly man. He needed to experience what we experience, and he needed to conquer it. He needed to do better than we have done, and praise God, he has. Jesus has experienced every temptation and suffering we experience, but Jesus triumphs over it rather than it triumphing over him. He was tempted more fully than we were because Jesus never gave in. We turn the relief valve on temptation when we sin. Jesus never turned that relief valve. He endured temptation to its fullness and did not sin. He has suffered more thoroughly than us because when he suffered, he brought it to its complete fulfillment and end when he cries out on the cross, "It is finished." Jesus suffers fully in a way that we suffer partially. He sorrows more deeply than us because he himself is described as the man of sorrows. Jesus suffers. He sorrows. And Jesus pays more completely for our sin than we ever could because Jesus pays the debt. If we were to pay the debt for our sin, it would be like that monthly mortgage payment that feels like it's never going to end. Paying off an infinite bill, paying less than the interest in every payment, only going further and further into debt. But that is not how Jesus paid our debt, because Jesus was hung on a cross and he cried out, "It is finished," and he conquered death, he conquered the grave, our sin debt paid in full, completely satisfied. He paid more than we ever could. Jesus is fully and truly human for us. And so, yes, we serve a great God. The Son is great and wonderful and transcendent, but he is also human. He is with us. He is immanent. He is our priest. He is touched with our infirmities. He is tempted like we are. He experiences the suffering and the sorrow that we are. He sits at the grave of his friend Lazarus and weeps. He hangs on the cross in pain. He hungers in the wilderness. He cries as an infant. He is like us, but he is greater than us. So what do we do with this Jesus? Rest in the incarnate Son. Rest in him who has known suffering, who has walked through pain and agony, who has experienced temptation, who has done all the hard things that you think are overwhelming you, but has done them to their fulfillment and never faltered and never failed. Trust in him. Rest in him. But never forget his greatness. Trust in him. Rest in him. Walk with him. But worship him. Because as close as he is, as near as he is, as like us as he is also simultaneously holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. Perfect in splendor, perfect in majesty, an inaccessible light, but he comes to us and loves us. Worship him, trust in him, rest in him. He urges us to take it very seriously because he is great, because he is holy, because he is of surpassing worth. We ought not partake of this lightly. But it also serves to remind us that he is for us. His physical body was given for us. His physical blood was shed for us. And so, on the night he was betrayed, he took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Then in the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant, and my blood. Do this when you drink it in remembrance of me." Let's stand together again as we once again revisit a portion of the song we just sang. Consider to yourself, is he worthy? Is he worthy? He is. So how do we live as servants of our worthy King?
Is anyone worthy? Is anyone whole? Is anyone able to break the seal and open the scroll? The Lion of Judah, who conquered the grave. He is David's root and the Lamb who died to ransom the slave. Is he worthy? Is he worthy of all blessing and honor and glory? Is he worthy of this? He is.
Praise the Lord. He is worthy. So glad that you're with us this morning. Several of our last session of ABFs are wrapping up today. I know that some of them aren't meeting, including mine. I don't think yours is meeting either, but some are meeting. If you want to stay around and chat, if yours isn't meeting, or even, Jim, you're doing yours in here, right? So we do have one in here if you'd like to be a part of that in the book of James. Next week, we're starting new ABFs, so we're really looking forward to that next Sunday. We're going to have one on Philippians. We're going to have one on mental health. And then we're going to have one on Christianity Explored. Really looking forward to those. You can sign up for those on the connections table. Also, next Sunday after ABF, we're going to be having a brunch here at church. You don't have to bring anything. It's the teens are putting it on as one last fundraiser for Challenge. I know we've had a lot all at once. We're going to work on spreading those out next year a little bit. But they're having a brunch that they're going to be preparing for us after the ABF. If you would like to be a part of that, you just have to go over there and eat breakfast and give a donation that you think is appropriate for the meal that you're going to enjoy and the fellowship we're going to enjoy together as a church family. That's next Sunday after the service. Close with this. May our Lord Jesus Christ himself and God our Father, who loved us, by his grace gave us eternal encouragement and good hope, encourage your hearts and strengthen you in every good deed and word. Have a great week.